when doing integration using substitution. First, let's go through some very basic example and let me state some very obvious things for you. If I tell you integrate, I'll be stating some very, very obvious things. X plus cos x, and the upper limit is pi and the lower limit is 0 and dx. And I'm calling this integral I. The entire answer I get is an integral. I'm not telling you the physical significance of this integral, but this is an integral I'm calling I. Acha, what will you do? Kuch cheezein that you are doing, but you're not taking some very obvious things into consideration. Kya karoge? What do you do in the first step? You'll integrate. With respect to what variable are you integrating? I know I'm asking very obvious questions, but they are important questions. You are integrating with respect to what made you decide this? Very good. Very good. This dx is what makes you decide that you are supposed to integrate. This is the sign of integral itself. And this dx is telling you to integrate with respect to x. So let's integrate it. Let's do this one bit. What will I get? X, the integral of x is x square upon. What about cos x? लिखते जाओ साथ साथ करो. Sin x. The upper limit is pi and the lower limit is 0. Make sense? Now what will you do? Values of what? Where will you substitute it? In place of? Isn't that right or wrong? So you'll यहाँ पे भी you'll plus substitute the values, the upper limit, and which is pi square upon 2 plus sine pi. This will be your upper limit minus 0 square upon 2 plus sine 0. Isn't that right? So your integral will be pi square upon 2 plus sine pi is again 0. So I guess this will be your answer. Isn't that the case? This is your exact answer. यहाँ तक clear है? Isn't this the case? So what did you do? You did some very common things, but now I'll state the obvious. You integrated with respect to x. Then you plugged in the values of x as well. Isn't that right? Yeah. What made you decide that? The dx. The dx. Isn't this right? Now I'll write another example that you people have done. When you're finding area between the curve and the x-axis, what do you do? How do you find the area? I'll just write something that you have done in your AS, but you never paid attention to. But now it will become, you will integrate the entire equation of y with respect to x. Isn't this how you do it? You integrate with respect to x. What do you integrate? The entire equation of y. सबसे पहला काम आप क्या करते हैं? You substitute the equation of y in this. Isn't this right? Already done in AS. Why do you do this? Why you substitute y in terms of x? Because you need to do two things with respect to x. What two things? The first thing that you do is substitute y in terms of x. जो भी y का function होता है x square plus 2, 2x plus 5x plus 2 whole square, whatever the function is. You substitute that function, where you integrate and then you plug in the values. There are two things that you are doing, keeping x into focus. पहली क्या है? वो तो कर दिया. उसके बाद किया इसलिए you did it for a purpose. Why? Because you had to integrate with respect to x and then you had to substitute the values of x. b and a were values of x. इसी तरह if I had to find area between the curve and the y-axis, how did you do it? ये सब AS में किया हुआ. I'm not telling you anything new. All of this is already done in AS. Isn't that right? Then you integrated with respect to y. तो आप पहले x को सब्जेक्ट बना के you plugged it in. You integrated with y. What were these values? ये b और a किसकी values थी? Values of which variable? Yes, they are the upper and the lower limits, but values of which variable? नीचे वाले में y की. Isn't that right? So these are very obvious things that you people have already done, but now we need to focus on these things. इसी तरह if I would have asked you volume of rotation for 360 degree about the x-axis, how did you find this volume? वही सेम थिंग दैट यू डिड, एरिया से एक स्टेप आगे की चीज पाई, isn't that right? B was your upper limit, A was your lower limit, ऐसा ही है. So first you squared y, you plugged it in terms of x. So I'm not focusing on that. I'm focusing on the two things that this topic focuses on. Integrating with respect to x and plugging in the values of x. दोनों चीजें what is it that decides it? This is the part. Isn't that right or wrong? यहाँ तक clear है? Okay, now beginning with substitution. First, let me present with you a problem that you will not be able to do by other means. If I tell you to integrate, चलो values को फिलहाल छोड़ दो. If I do not have the values, and if I tell you to, let's do it without the values. If I tell you to integrate cos x e to the power sin x dx. Now, what are you supposed to integrate this with respect to what? X. How will you integrate it? It's a very, very complex question if you integrate this with respect to x. Why? Exponential में itself, it's a trigonometric exponential खुद एक function. The power has another trigonometric function. And then there are two functions that are multiplying. Have you studied any product rule for integration? कुछ पढ़ा है नहीं पढ़ा? You've just done basic integration. No product rule. If the functions are multiplying, how will you integrate it? You do not know. Even if you know, if उसके बाद you won't be able to do this. वो हम पढ़ेंगे आगे जाकर, but still you won't be able to do this one through that way. अच्छा, पहले तो bless your parents, tell them बहुत ज़्यादा thank you बोलना जाके कि वो तुम लोगों को A levels करवा रहे हैं. In A levels, they always provide you with the substitution. कि क्या substitute करना है. So you do not have to worry about that. That's the easiest part. कि they provide you with the substitution. You're just supposed to be sensible enough to substitute it in the right way and substitute everything that needs to be substituted. So I will provide you with the substitution just as your A level syllabus does. मैंने कहा let's by substituting u as sin x. Now, what variable am I trying to substitute it with? Sin x को मैं किस variable से substitute कर रहा हूँ? U. That means I want to convert this entire integral in terms of something in terms of u. So what other thing do I need to change as well? वो तो करना पड़ेगा. You are right. That will change. EQ is just a Euler number by dx. Very good. Why? Because when we are going for the variable u, we will want to integrate in terms of u, and for that we will need a du. Isn't that right or wrong? So keep this in mind whenever you're given with substitution. Well, you're supposed to substitute three things, but right now we are focusing on two. I'll just go to the third one right in just a couple of minutes. ये तो substitute करेंगे हम. So the first thing that we are doing is एक एक करके सही है. Let me just write it. I'll do it step by step. E to the power u. अभी तक कोई problem? We'll do everything. Don't worry. We'll substitute each and everything. How do I substitute this dx? कहां से आएगा मेरे पास ये dx? If I differentiate this, what do I get? If I differentiate this substitution equation, what do I get? If I differentiate this, what do I get? If I differentiate this, what do I get? The reason for stressing on every point in differentiation यही था. If I differentiate this, what do I get? Du, just du. If I differentiate this, I get du by dx, which is cos x. The reason for stressing on all these points in differentiation topic was this. Not just this, आगे जाके और पता चलेगा क्यों I was stressing on these points. I was telling you, first know what your derivative is called. फिर उसके बाद differentiate the function. If u is cos x, sin x, if I am differentiating u with respect to x, isn't this right or wrong? Don't worry, वो कर लेंगे, परेशान होने की जरूरत नहीं है. पहले understand this. Now, इससे can I make dx the subject of the formula? What will be my dx? Cos du upon, I prefer to write it in this way, 1 upon cos x du. Any issue? Any problem? Dx वहां जाके multiply हुआ, cos x comes over here and divides. So now in place of dx, can I substitute this? What do I get? Cos x and cos x cancelled out. What am I left with? Integrable now. Integrable now. What will be the integral of this? EU plus C. Makes sense? Clear hai? Now let me just extend this one small bit. Almost the same function, but let me add another element. Now your values are pi by 2 and 0. Which variable do they represent? X. When I'll integrate, I'll plug in these values in place of. Isn't that right or wrong? So once I convert this entire integral in terms of u, will it be justified to go with the values of x? I already know ये पूरा मैंने, I have converted the entire integral. I am not integrating right now, but just by applying substitution of two things, the variable and the dx part, ये दो को मैंने भी substitute किया है, and this is what I end up at. Isn't that right? But एक थोड़ा सा injustice मैं कर रहा हूँ कि if I have converted पूरी integration को, if I have taken it into u, I should be using the values of u now, कि सब जो substitute करूँ वो किसकी करूँ? U की values. Isn't that right? So how will I do that again? We'll use the very basic integration substitution, which the question will almost always provide us. उसने ये बात हमें बताई थी. This is an equation that relates u with the variable x. I can just plug in u. Yes. And I'll know that when x is pi upon 2, what value does my u take? What value does my u take? And when x is 0, अच्छा इसमें नेवर वरी क्या अपर लिमिट बड़ी होनी चाहिए, द लोअर लिमिट मस्ट बी स्मॉलर. इसमें डोंट वरी अबाउट दैट. इसमें जो जहां सब्स्टिट्यूट हो रहा है, जस्ट प्लेस इट एज इट इज. नेवर वरी, ओहो आई एम प्लेसिंग अ बिगर वैल्यू एज अ लोअर लिमिट. नॉट टू वरी, यू डोंट हैव टू वरी अबाउट दैट. जो जहां की सब्स्टिट्यूशन है, जस्ट बी क्लियर अबाउट इट. सो इफ द अपर लिमिट इज 1, यहाँ पे अपर लिमिट आनी चाहिए. सो दिस इज द थर्ड थिंग, दैट इज 0 0 आ गई. नाउ कैन वी इंटीग्रेट? We already know the integral is e to the power u. Upper limit is 1, lower limit is 0. So I end up getting as e to the power 1 minus e to the power 0, which is 1. So e minus 1 is my answer. This is my exact answer. कितनी आसान हो गई integration, and I end up getting this answer. Sorry? तो नहीं, हाँ उसके अलावा we prefer exact. Mostly in exact answer questions, the question says to find the exact value. वो exact होता है. वरना 3SF पे we can round off. अब let me just prove one thing to you. Okay, if I would have, let's see कि calculator पहले देता है नहीं देता. Does my calculator have that limitation? If I plug in this entire thing in my calculator with the same limits and everything, this one. Let's see, does my calculator respond? सबसे पहले तो make sure that the calculator is in radians. Now, if I plug in this entire thing as an integral cos of x and then e to the power, I do not even know whether my calculator will respond or not. The upper limit is pi by 2 and the lower limit is 0. Makes sense? So I'm just trying to check. This is the value that I end up getting 1.71828, 1828, 1828. So if I take my E, which is alpha, and this E minus 1, do I get the same value? Obviously, the answer does not change. Make sense? समझ आ गया? Clear है? So when you are integrating, you need to substitute three things. The variable entirely, जहां जहां you see that variable, you substitute it. The second thing that you need to substitute is the dx part. If you're substituting for dx, ये वाला derivative हट जाए, and the new variable that we are trying to introduce, उसका derivative वहां जाए. And the third thing, if it's a definite integral, the limits has to be introduced as per the new variable. Is this clear? लिख लो इसको. तो दुआएं तो बहुत सारी that they're making you do A levels. Inter वाले students tend to memorize these substitutions. ये होगा तो you in this and that. It's very hectic and useless, I'm telling you. I did my levels. I never memorized anything when I went to university. Why I figured out teachers कहते तो आपको पता होना चाहिए. Why? How is it helping me solve problems in real life? Never figured that out. But the inter students tend to study a higher level of calculus than us, but this is the direction in which they are studying. Yeah. So वो ये भी बेचारे याद करते हैं. You are provided with the substitution. U is sine, x is sine square theta. The question is telling you this is what you need to substitute. ठीक हो गया? Okay, so let's do the first bit. We are starting with this. पहले में they have provided you with an indefinite integral and they are telling you x upon 1 minus x. And they want you to write it or prove it that after substituting the same integral, I'm telling you, after these substitution, the value or the integral doesn't change. कोई इसकी answers नहीं change हो जाते. It's just the way you will integrate that will become easier for you. This is what we are supposed to do. This is our task, and the substitution that we have been provided is this. Make sense? Want to give it a try? Chalo, let's try. So the first thing that you started with is replacing the x. You said यहाँ पे let's plug in sine square theta. And यहाँ पे भी let's plug in sine square theta. यहाँ तक everything was all good, right? Then you had to replace this dx. For the dx, you decided to differentiate this. What do you get when you differentiate this? Dx by d theta. Isn't that right? क्या आया बताओ ना, इसको डिफरेंशिएट कर रहे हो तो what do you end up getting? 2 sine theta cos theta. Isn't that right? So what will dx be equal to? 2 sine theta cos theta d theta. Isn't that right? कोई प्रॉब्लम है यहाँ तक तो बताओ. Anything that I've missed out on? So then you said, okay, let's substitute this dx as 2 sine theta cos theta. Just go नहीं करता हूँ. I'll just substitute it in a different step so that you understand. So dx की जगह you decided that it should be 2 sine theta cos theta d theta. Makes sense? What about these under roots? So this can become cos square theta. And इनका रूट कैसे लेते हैं भाई? I did not bother making it tan square. So I end up getting sine theta upon cos theta. Isn't that right? Now the cos theta and the cos theta cancelled out. So I end up getting 2 sine square theta. Is this clear? Hmm? But now the question says कि अब वो limits भी आ गई, so it's a definite integral. Now these limits are values of which variable? X. And we have decided to integrate this entire with respect to theta. So we have already ended up at getting 2 sine square theta. So what must we do? To value 1 over 4, we must find the theta values for these. How will we do it? X की जगह वैल्यू डाल देंगे 1/4. अब इसमें स्टूडेंट्स टेंड टू गेट कंफ्यूज कि जब हम रूट लें तो पॉजिटिव लें नेगेटिव लें. तो लेट्स अगेन, अगर नेगेटिव इज नॉट स्पेसिफाइड सो पॉजिटिव वाली ही रूट लो, हाफ आ जाएगा. रूट लो साइन थीटा विल बिकम हाफ. So theta is pi by 3 pi by 6. इसी तरह when you substitute 0 you will get theta as 0. Isn't that right? पहले चेक कर लो सब. So these are the limits that you will use with. चेक करो, pi by 6 आ रहा है and 0. यही आ रही है लिमिट्स. हम्म. Now how do we integrate this 2 sine square theta d theta? Yes. How will we want to integrate it? कैसे integrate कर लेंगे इसको sine square theta d theta? तो हम reverse differentiation. So we know that cos 2 theta is 1 minus 2 sine square theta. So 2 sine square theta will be equal to what? 1 minus cos 2 theta. Now is this integrable? Yes. Now let's integrate 1 minus sine 2 theta upon 2. The upper limit is pi by 6. The lower limit is 0. Plug in the values and tell me the answer that you end up with, the exact value. थोड़ी सी यहाँ पे करेक्शन. दिस 1 का इंटीग्रल विल बी थीटा, इट वोंट बी 1. सॉरी, इसको बस जस्ट राइट इट एज थीटा. नाउ प्लग इन द वैल्यूज एंड टेल मी व्हाट डू यू एंड अप गेटिंग. So when you plug in pi by 6, I've told you how to do this. Do the trigonometry part separately and the non-trigonometry part separately. Pi upon 3 आया तो वो square root 3 upon 4. When you plug in 0, you'll get 0, I believe. Pi upon 6, sorry, pi upon 2 के लिए. Pi upon 6 and check करो minus root 3 upon 4. There are two ways of approaching this question. सबसे पहले तो I started with this integral and the limits were 4, 1, 1 over x 4 minus square root of x dx. Is that right? And u was taken as square root of x. यहाँ तक सबको clear है? And we have to substitute and make it पूरा u में लेकर जाना है everything. सही है? Okay. So the first thing that we can do is पहले तो substitute करते हैं. हाँ तो क्या करें जहां पर हमारे पास x है what do we plug in that place जल्दी से बताओ यहाँ पर u. What about in place of x? U square. कैसे? If you square both sides, what do I get? U square is x. Is that right? यहाँ तक तो क्लियर है. Again, plug in the values. जो जो कर सकते हो, do that. Very good. X की जगह you plug in 4, 4 का root is 2, and x की जगह you plug in 1, 1 का root is 1. And I've told you यहाँ पे, if the root is not specified, we always take it as the positive root, right? यहाँ तक clear है? Okay. Now, one thing, there are two ways of approaching the question after this because you want to substitute this dx. एक तो पहला है the students if they differentiate this equation. What do they get if they differentiate it? This is x to the power half. So du by dx is half x to the power negative half. Is that right or wrong? And this can be written as 1 over 2 square root of x. Yes. Is that right? Now, in place of, I need to substitute dx. Dx is 2 square root of x du. And in place of square root of x, I can just plug in u. Square root of x is u, right? So I get 2u du. This is one approach. Now let's go to the other approach as well. If I decide to differentiate this, अगर मैं इसको ऐसे लिख लूं भाई, x is u square. And now if I decide to differentiate this, what will be my derivative? Dx by du. And what will that be? 2u. Either ways, my dx is 2u du. Both ways, dx की जगह 2u du आया, one of the u's cancelled out. And I end up getting 2 आएगा सिर्फ और नीचे एक u cancel होगा. Is this clear now? Now the integration is very easy. How will we integrate this? How do we integrate these kinds of questions? How can we do ln नीचे quadratic है? We'll first break it into partial fractions and then integrate. Is this clear?